work at Starbucks, and something happened a few weeks ago that really freaked me out. For a little background, I'm an 18-year-old female and have worked at Starbucks for about 6 months. So I was working until close one day, and I was behind the counter making drinks for most of the time. For much of the shift, I was kept pretty busy. I didn't really notice many of the people that would be sitting around inside. Our location is large enough that there's a good amount of tables and seats. It's fairly popular for people to bring their laptops and work and things like that. At one point, I noticed a few of the people sitting around. One of them was this guy sitting alone at a table on his laptop. He was probably about middle-aged, had dark hair, and was wearing a blue jacket. When I noticed him, he was staring at me. He didn't look away though when I saw him. I had to look away because it was weird. But then I just kept working and I didn't think about the guy or look over in his direction anymore. Hours later though, when things quieted down significantly, I was not quite as busy. At that point, I noticed the very few people that were still inside. I think there were just 2 or 3 people sitting around. One of them was the same guy from earlier, and when I noticed him, he was staring at me again and once more did not look away. It was almost unsettling how weird it seemed to me. I also thought that it was weird at first how he had been there for so long, but I guessed it wasn't that strange for people to work all day in a coffee shop after all. As we approached closing time, it was now just me and another coworker. The other customers soon left, but the man remained. The closer it got to closing time, the more nervous I was. Was he just going to keep sitting here past close? Thankfully, with about 5 minutes left before we closed for the night, I saw him getting up to leave. Then he walked out the door, and I felt better. I stayed for a while longer until I was good to go. After I left work, I just drove straight home that night. The Starbucks is in an area with lots of other stores and restaurants right nearby, and it's always kind of busy over there. I live with my parents at their house, which is about a 10-minute drive from the Starbucks. So I drove home and then went inside. It was probably like 9 p.m. by that point. I just remember that maybe about 10 minutes or so after getting back, I noticed this car parked on the side of the street outside. It was pretty much across from our house and the engine of the car was running. What was strange is that it's pretty unusual for cars to be parked on the side of our street. It's not really in the city and everybody has large driveways. I saw the lights to the car turn off and I just decided to go over to the window and look at it. When I got closer, I noticed that there was somebody inside the driver's seat. It looked just like the same guy who had been at the Starbucks staring at me. At first, I thought that I was paranoid thinking about the guy and there was no way that it was really him. But then he looked over at the house. I saw him for like a second, and then I quickly ducked down so that he wouldn't see me. I realized in that moment that it was for sure the same guy. This kind of freaked me out, because of course I wondered if he had somehow followed me home or something. I went away from the window, and I didn't want him to see me or anything. But a short time later, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went back. Not only was the car still there, but the man was still in the driver's seat and appeared to be looking at me. I moved away from the window again and found my dad, who was thankfully still up. He decided to go outside and confront the man. However, as soon as my dad left the house and began to walk towards the car, it quickly drove away. I figured that was pretty incriminating and that he probably wasn't just there because he was lost or something. Since then, I have not seen the man, not in my neighborhood and not at Starbucks, and I'm really happy about that. I'm hoping that I never see him again. Several years ago, I worked a temporary job as a part-time security guard. It was a job that I was not really qualified for, but I guess there wasn't really any requirements. There was this building in the sort of downtown area of the city that I lived in. The building was a mix of some offices and some other businesses. It went up several stories and connected to other buildings as well. During the day, the building was open and there would be somebody who worked at the main desk. Many people would walk through the building during the day, but at night it was closed, and for some reason they still needed a security guard. I would literally just sit in the desk all night and do nothing. Nobody ever came to the building, and I never had to talk to anyone. I wore a security guard uniform that was similar to a cop's outfit, but I was certainly no cop, not even close. The only training I got really was to call the cops if anything happened. But on the other hand, I could just sit down and go on my phone for hours and get paid for it. I could play games and watch YouTube videos and do whatever I wanted really. I would also walk around the lobby area and some of the connecting hallways to get my steps in. I didn't mind the job much because it was just part-time, so it didn't really get old. Anyways, one night I was working, and by this point it was probably after midnight. I know that I was at my desk like usual when somebody knocked on the door. This was something that had never happened before. There were 2 glass doors that were at the main entrance. Obviously, they were locked now. I wasn't really sure why somebody would be knocking on the doors, but I felt like it was my job to go and check. They also tried to open the doors as I got up, so I walked over to see who was there. When I arrived, I saw a relatively young woman standing there outside. It was a fairly cold night and a little rainy as well. By this time, really nobody else was out walking on the sidewalks or streets. When I got to the door, she was motioning for me to open it. I knew that I was to never let anybody in the building after close, so I tried to tell her through the glass that we were closed and she could not come in. She didn't seem to get it though, and motioned that she could not hear me and for me to open the door again. So reluctantly, I did. I opened the door just a small amount, and I told the woman that the building was closed. She said something like she was very cold and needed to use the restroom quick. I told her that the building was off limits, and I gave her directions to a building nearby that was actually open. She did not seem satisfied, but accepted what I said and started to walk away. Then I closed the door and went back over to my desk. That was the first time that anybody had ever come to the door while I was working. In fact, it was the first time that I had ever interacted with anybody at the job. However, not more than 20 minutes later, I heard a knocking at the door again. This was really weird, but then I figured that it was probably the same woman there again for some reason. I walked over and saw that there was now a man standing right outside the door. He had a hooded sweater on, but that didn't seem very suspicious because the weather would call for that. The man knocked again and waved me over. I walked over to him, and then without really giving it a second thought, I opened the door a crack. I was going to tell him the same thing that I told the woman. However, literally the second that I opened the door, the man barged his way in, pushing the door into me. Then he pushed me over, knocking me to the ground. Before the door swung back and closed, another man forced his way inside and stepped over me as I was on the ground now. I did not have any weapons, and I wasn't getting paid enough to stand there and fight the guys. So I got up and quickly ran out the door and left the building. The men were now both inside to do who knows what. I ran a safe distance away and I called the police. I walked around the sidewalks freezing cold, hoping that the men didn't come after me or anything. Soon though, the police got there and I flagged them down. 3 cars with a total of 5 officers arrived on scene, and some stayed and talked with me while others entered the building. And thankfully they were able to apprehend the 2 men who were still inside the building. They also tracked down that same woman who I had talked to earlier. Apparently she was the getaway driver for the men and was in on it, which made sense. After that I went back to work, but quit a short time after. That was a little too much action for me. I'm still mad at myself for opening the door and letting the guys in. I had just talked to the woman and that had gone fine though, so I wasn't really thinking. I guess maybe their original plan was to try to get her in the building. When that didn't work, they decided to go in by force. When I was in college during my junior year, I lived in a house with another guy. His name was Sam, and we had met the year prior in a class project. I had a good amount of friends in college, but I wasn't able to find a good living situation, because for a while I didn't know if I was going to be transferring schools or staying. I ended up staying, which I was happy about, but I was kind of late to find a place for the following year. It was pretty much a situation where I would have to live in the dorms again. But then the guy I had a class with kind of randomly asked me if I knew where I was living, and I said no. So he told me that he needed a roommate for a house that he was living in. I pretty much said yes right away. I felt like I had gotten lucky at the situation, and I didn't know Sam very well other than the class that we had together. We had never hung out or anything, but I figured that it would be fine. So the house was pretty small and old, but other than that it was better than the dorms. It had an upstairs with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Then downstairs was another bathroom, a kitchen, living room, and a dining room. After moving in, things started out fine. I didn't really do much with Sam, we mostly kept to ourselves, but I didn't have a problem with him at all, and he was cool. However, several months into living there, some strange things started happening. One night, I remembered that I heard a door keep opening and closing downstairs. It was really weird. It was like it kept opening and then closing right away, non-stop. It creeped me out, so I got out of bed and went to look. By the time I got downstairs though, nobody was there. It was so weird. I went back upstairs and Sam's door was closed, so I assumed he was asleep. I didn't know how to explain the noise, but I was able to go back to bed a while later. Now, like a week or so after that, I remember that I was woken up to the sound of somebody knocking on my bedroom door. I thought that it had to be Sam, obviously. After waking up, I asked what he wanted, but he didn't answer me. I got up and went over to the door and opened it, but nobody was there. It was really strange. Then, later on, one time when I was doing homework late at night, I heard footsteps downstairs. I assumed that it was Sam, but then he texted me asking if I was downstairs. When I said no, he said that he heard someone down there. I did as well, and it really creeped me out. So I remember that we both went downstairs and looked all around, but didn't find anyone. It was really strange, and we even considered calling the police, but decided not to. So some really weird things have been happening around the house. I talked with Sam for a while about it, and he claimed that he had heard some strange things too. Then things got even worse. One night I heard a loud banging on my bedroom door. It was like somebody was trying to break the door down. I didn't want to open it, but it wasn't locked or anything. After it stopped, things went quiet for a while. Then I finally went over and looked. When I opened the door, nobody was there. It was very strange how all these weird things were happening. I didn't even want to live in the house anymore. Then, one night shortly after that, I got added on Snapchat by a guy from our school. I knew him because he was friends with Sam, but I wasn't really friends with him. After adding him back, he texted me and asked me if strange things were happening in our house, and I said yes. The guy then told me that it was all Sam. He said that Sam had told him how he pretends to make the house all scary. He said he did that because he thought it was funny and he didn't like me, and he also hoped that I would get scared and move out. Apparently, this guy had had a falling out with Sam for some reason, and they were not friends anymore. So now this guy wanted me to know the truth. He also said that he had even helped Sam once. I think it was the time when we both heard somebody downstairs. Anyways, I was shocked to hear it, and I wasn't sure if I should feel better or worse about this. I decided to confront Sam about it the next day. At first, he denied it, and then he tried to play it off as a joke. We argued briefly, and then we went our separate ways. For the rest of the time that I lived there, I barely spoke to Sam at all. But also, nothing else strange happened. I live alone in a house that I'm renting in a fairly average neighborhood. I moved here last year, and something really crazy happened shortly after. So it all started one day when I noticed this car parked a ways down the street. It was across from my house and a little ways down. It sort of stood out because it was a red car, so it got my attention. I went outside to get my mail at the end of the driveway, and I remember that as I did, I noticed that there was a man in the driver's seat of the red car. I found that strange because I had noticed the car out there like an hour earlier. So had he just been sitting in the car the whole time? When I saw the guy, he was not looking at me, but looking down at, I'm guessing, his phone. I just casually turned around and then walked back inside of my house. It didn't seem like too big of a deal to me or anything. So as it got later, the sun started to set. I was passing by the front of the house and I noticed the red car was still there. But also I could see that the man was still in the driver's seat. And then I saw that his driver's window was down and he appeared to be taking a picture of my house or something. His phone was out and sort of pointed in my direction. I didn't think that he could see me or anything, but I moved away just in case. Several minutes later, when I looked, he was finally gone. It was a pretty weird thing, but he was gone now, so I figured that was that. As strange as it might be, I just hoped that he would never return. But I was wrong. 2 nights later, I was at home by myself, and it was much later at night now. I didn't have work the next day, so I was staying up pretty late. I was in my bedroom, and I heard the sound of a loud bang coming from the back door. I got up and was instantly thinking that someone was trying to break in. After leaving my bedroom, I started to head towards the back door, but slowed down. I heard another loud bang and looked around to see if I had any kind of a weapon. I really didn't though. Maybe I am unprepared, but I just never thought that somebody would try to break into my house. I then heard whoever it was trying to open the back door to the house. Thankfully, it was locked. I went over and looked out of a window. I just barely saw what looked like a man there, but I couldn't really make out any details. Everything was happening so fast. For some reason, I did not call the police right away. Looking back, I don't know why. You would think that would be the first thing to go through my mind in that situation, but I guess you never know how you will react in certain situations until you get in them. So anyways, there I was at the back door with some guy trying to get in. I got this crazy spontaneous idea and took out my phone. No, I still did not dial 911. Instead, I went to YouTube and looked up a really loud and annoying alarm sound. I clicked on the first video, and thankfully I forgot to turn my volume up because an ad started playing. Then I skipped the ad and turned my volume all the way up and hit play. The annoying alarm started blaring, and thankfully it worked. The guy at my back door stopped trying to break in and he moved away. He then went back around the front and left my property. Then, after I calmed down a little, I finally came to my senses and dialed the police. They came out and looked around and saw some slight damage to my back door. I filled out a report and then the police left and said they would look around for the man. However, he was never found to my knowledge. I believe that it was the same man who I had seen days prior. I don't know for sure, but those two suspicious situations seem to be linked to me. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since. I live alone in a house and I've lived here for 2 years now. This is an event that took place several months back and is still very fresh in my memory. So it was nighttime and I was alone in my house and in my bedroom. The house is not very large and my room is on the ground level. As I was watching TV and sitting on my bed, it was starting to get late and was maybe 11 or 12. Because it was late, things were very quiet aside from the volume on my TV, which was not that loud. All of a sudden, I heard this noise from the back end of my house. It sounded like maybe from the backyard, and it seemed like somebody had hit a back window. Before I could compute what was going on in my head though, I heard glass breaking. The sound was coming from the same area. Then I knew that somebody was breaking in. My first reaction at that point was to run to my bedroom door and lock it, which I did. I heard whoever had gotten in the house was still at the back side of it. Then my next course of action was to dial 911. I went over and located my phone, which was also on my bed. I quickly scrambled to dial for the police. Then I went to the back corner of my room. As soon as someone answered the phone, I said that my house was being broken into. I gave my address, but I spoke as quietly as I could. I didn't really hear anything during that time as far as where the intruder was, but maybe 30 seconds later, I heard the footsteps approaching the hallway where my bedroom is. Then, moments later, they arrived right outside my door. I muted the phone and tossed it aside in a panic. I didn't want them to hear me. Then, the intruder tried opening my bedroom door. That got me really scared because I had hoped that maybe they wouldn't want to be seen. I felt like they knew I was in here, but possibly they just wanted to see what was in the room. Maybe they just wanted to steal stuff. But now they were coming straight for me. After the door did not open from being locked, I heard a loud man's voice. He yelled for me to open the door now. It was very angry, and of course, I was not going to do that. After a few seconds, he banged on the door very hard 2 times. At that point, I just wanted to get out of there. I debated trying to open my bedroom window and jump out of it, or I could look around and see if I had anything to use as a weapon. I didn't really have much of anything though. I was heading over to the window and the guy started to walk away. Then I stopped. If he was leaving, I didn't want to run into him out of the house. I wasn't sure where he was going though or what he was doing, but I was just moving off of instincts at that point. My mind barely was even thinking at all. I don't even know how long this went on, but I was basically just pacing around and listening for the man. I didn't really hear much though. After I have no idea how long, I heard my back door opening. Then, probably like 30 seconds to a minute later, I heard noises out front. I still thought that it was the man, but it was actually the police. They came inside and I finally left my room. After searching the house, the man had left out the back door just a short time earlier. Some other cops searched the neighborhood and were able to find the man. He was caught just a block away, which made me feel 100 times better. I didn't know who he was or why he chose to break into my house. I'm really glad that my bedroom door had a lock on it though. If not, I'm not sure what would have happened. Something really creepy happened to me last month. I live in an apartment building. It's pretty standard for the most part. The place is nice and most of the residents seem nice as well. It's not a dumpy place or anything, but it's not the greatest in the world either. I've lived here for almost 2 years and it's been good. There's a mailroom just inside the doors on the first floor where we get packages and stuff. I order things online all the time, and I have an Amazon Prime account that I use a lot. It's very convenient because you can get next day delivery sometimes. I remember that my coffee maker broke one day and I decided to order a new one. I drink coffee quite a bit, especially in the mornings before work, so I found one on Amazon for next day delivery. I saw when I was at work the next day that it had been delivered, and I went down to the mailroom when I got back home from work. However, when I arrived in the mailroom, I couldn't find my package. There's usually a lot of packages in the mailroom, but I looked at each and every one of them, and mine was not there. I didn't know if somebody had took it by mistake or what, because it said that it had been delivered. So I went back up to my apartment, and I was going on Amazon trying to figure out how to get my money back or something. Then, suddenly, there was a knock on my door. This was nighttime, so I didn't know who could be there. I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I opened up the door out of curiosity. There, sitting on the ground, was my coffee maker. I picked it up and was just so confused. I brought it inside and saw that the box was already open. The coffee maker was inside of it, but I had no clue why it was left on my doorstep now. After thinking about it for a while, the only thing I could think of was that somebody else took it by mistake. Maybe they thought it was theirs and opened it and then realized that it wasn't theirs. I really didn't know. That didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, but I couldn't think of any other logical explanation. I also didn't know who had done it. I decided not to contact Amazon or anything. I figured this was just a freak thing and it wouldn't happen again. And at the end of the day, I had gotten my coffee maker like I had ordered. After a few days, I pretty much forgot about it. I used the coffee maker and it worked fine and everything. Well, sometime the next week, I ordered something on Amazon again. This time, it was skincare stuff. I went down to the mailroom to get the package when I got home from work again. It said that it was delivered. So when I looked in the mailroom, once more, I could not find it. When I looked at every package there and none of them had my name on it, I remembered back to the last time. I thought to myself, this better not have happened again. I went back up to my apartment and really did not know what to do. Sure enough though, later on in the night there was a knock at my door. I quickly went over to it and opened it. Whoever had knocked was gone, but my skincare products were also not outside the door. Instead, there was a note there. I picked it up and read it. It said, "To get your package, come to 112. That was the number of another unit on my floor. I didn't know all my neighbors or who exactly lived in 112, but I now knew who was stealing my packages. I did not go to the room to get it. Instead, I reported it to management of the apartment building. They ended up investigating by looking at the security footage. A guy who I had seen around a few times but never spoke to was the culprit. It showed him taking both my packages back to his apartment, then putting the things on my front step. He ended up getting evicted for it. Why he did that, I don't know. For a short time period, I used to work as a customer service representative during nights. It was a job that I did from home. I would work my normal job during the day and then work the night shift at home taking calls. I had a guest room in my apartment that I worked out of, and it was normally pretty easy. I used my guest room as an office, and from like 8 o'clock at night until midnight, I sat at my desk with my headset and my computer. I was able to take calls, help customers for the business that I worked for, and stay at home. I was working a lot at the time to save up money, and I only did 2 jobs at once for several months. For this job though, I wouldn't be getting calls all the time. I'd get maybe like 10 a night, so there was a lot of downtime where I could just relax mostly, and I got paid the whole time, which was good. So, nearing the end of my shift one night, it was shortly after 11 p.m. This was not necessarily a quieter time, but it was just later. I found that there was about the same amount of calls regardless of the time, but on this night, I hadn't happened to get a call in a little while. So then, I got a phone call and answered, except this was not the normal customer. When I said hello, at first, nobody said anything on the other end of the phone. When I said hello again, this time I heard a man's voice start to speak. He did not sound normal though. It was like he was trying to disguise his voice or something. What he said next really creeped me out. The man told me that he was outside my apartment. I said, "Come again?" The man then said that he was right outside and claimed that he could see me. I asked if this was a prank, and he started laughing this creepy laugh. I didn't recognize the voice as anybody that I would know. I asked again why he called. The guy said that he just wanted to let me know that he was right outside my place and that I should go look. I didn't believe him at all. I said, "No, you're not." Then I hung up on him because I was not willing to play games with some prank caller. But then, moments later, there was a knock on my apartment door. Instantly, I was extremely nervous. I had truly thought that it was just a prank call, but now it didn't seem like it. I stayed where I was in my office. Then there was another knock on the door. I decided to get up and go and see who was there. I walked over to my front door, but by the time I got there, I looked out of the peephole and whoever had been there was gone. Then I got another call. When I answered it, it was the same person right away. He gave me another creepy laugh and asked why I didn't answer the door. I asked who it was in a nervous voice, and then he hung up on me. I was so creeped out, fearing that I was being stalked or something, and I called the police. I told them what happened, and they said they would send an officer to my location. As I was waiting for them to arrive, I got another phone call. When I answered it, it was the same person, but just laughter. It was really creepy. Then they hung up again. When the police officer arrived at my apartment, I told him what happened, and he looked all around the building. Unfortunately, he never located who did it. After that, for the rest of my time working that job, nothing else like that happened. I still don't know who did that to me or why. A few years ago, I stayed at an Airbnb for the first and last time in my life. A small group of friends and I were on vacation, and we found an Airbnb for cheap, which still looked nice. It was nice because we didn't need to have any interaction with the host, since it was just a lockbox on the door with the key. The host had texted us the combination to get the key from the box, and we were able to let ourselves inside. Once inside, we got settled in and started making dinner. The house was pretty nice, just like we thought. What was strange though, as we explored the rooms, we noticed there were a lot of valuables just sitting out. For example, one of the rooms had a PS4 plugged in, and in a drawer in another room, there was some car and house insurance things, as well as some cash in a wallet. We thought it was strange how trusting the host was of random people staying in his place not to steal anything. We weren't planning on taking anything, but I'm sure there's some people who wouldn't think twice about it. Anyways, later that night after eating, we checked out the rest of the place, picked our bedrooms upstairs, and eventually checked out the basement. As we explored the large basement, we came across a door that was locked. The door being locked itself wasn't anything strange, but the fact that many valuables were left laying around in the house made us think, if none of the valuables were behind the locked door, what would the door need to be locked for, and what was behind it? Anyway, we continued with the rest of the night and went to bed at a good time since we had to be up early the next day. In the middle of that night, while sleeping in my bedroom upstairs, I was woken up with the urge to pee. I tried to go back to sleep, but it was bad enough to keep me up and I had to go to the bathroom. As I got out of bed and approached the door, I heard some movement out in the hallway. It sounded like somebody was shuffling down the carpeted hallway. I opened up my door to continue towards the bathroom, expecting to see one of my friends awake also trying to use the bathroom. When I opened my door, however, I saw someone at the end of the hallway opening a different door and look inside. I immediately could tell that this was not one of my friends based on the shape of the figure. I flipped on the light switch for the entire upper hallway, which was thankfully right near me. I screamed loud enough to wake up all my other friends as I saw a man at the end turn towards me with a look of surprise on his face. I was worried that he was going to attack someone, but thankfully, he seemed more ashamed and upset at getting caught snooping around the house and looking into our rooms. Turns out, he was the host of the Airbnb we were staying at. He tried to explain what he was doing here in the middle of the night, saying he was looking for some tools that he had left behind and needed for the morning. It wasn't a very convincing argument. After more questioning of the guy, we also found out he had been living in the locked room in the basement the whole time we had been there, even though he said we had the whole place to ourselves. Needless to say, all my friends and I are very certain that this guy was a creep and had probably been doing this to guests for years. On the bright side, at least he wasn't violent or aggressive, because we realized how much worse the situation at night could have been. I'm not certain what legal consequences this guy was faced with, but he did lose his right to rent out places at least. When I moved into my first ever house after living in apartments for many years. I was excited to have my own house with a small yard as well. The house was not the nicest one ever, but it was decent. The neighborhood was pretty typical. There were a bunch of houses on both sides of a quiet street with fairly small yards. After moving in, I was working on unpacking everything one day and I got a knock at the front door. I went over and saw a woman standing on my front step. I answered the door to her, and she said that she saw that I had just moved in. She had a box of cookies and gave them to me as a welcome gift. I thought that it was really nice of her, and I told her thanks. We talked for a short time, and she told me that she was my neighbor and lived down the street. Then she left, and I went back inside. I remember that a few days later she showed up at my house again. This time, the woman asked me if she could borrow a screwdriver and said that she didn't have one. I did, so I went and got it and gave it to her. We chatted for a very short time about basic stuff, and then she left. I remember when she was walking away though, I was expecting her to live maybe next door or right across the street, but I saw her turn and walk down the street and then go so far down that she went out of my sight. I didn't even see what house she went in. I still assumed her to live on the street, but I was kind of surprised that she didn't live closer. So the next day she brought the screwdriver back. When she did, I asked her where she lived exactly. She just told me that she lived down the street, not too far. I remember asking which house, and she just kind of pointed and said you couldn't quite see it from here. So a short time later, she left again. I watched her walk away, and I even walked a little farther out to see where she was going. Well, she literally walked to the very end of the street, and then left the block going to another street and went out of my sight. I was very confused. Why did she keep coming to my house? And how would she even know that I moved in if she didn't even live on my street? So I remember that one of the days after that, I was mowing my lawn. It was a weekend, so my next door neighbor happened to be mowing his lawn as well. We both finished at around the same time and met each other. We got to talking a little bit, and he said that he had been living in the neighborhood for over 20 years. I mentioned the lady to him, and I asked him who exactly she was, and after I described her in the best detail that I could to the guy, he said he had no idea who I was talking about. He thought that the situation seemed strange. So for a few days after that, I didn't see the woman or anything. But then, one day, I had work in the city. I worked in a pretty typical office building downtown. So the really weird part is that after work, I was walking down the street to get to my car. I saw this car parked on the side of the road amongst many others, but I saw a woman behind the wheel of one of them who appeared to be the same woman who was my neighbor. She was sort of far away. She appeared to look at me for a second and then look away. And when she was looking away, I didn't have a good view of her at all. I kept going and I soon made it to my car. I was not at all 100% sure that this was the same woman, but it sure looked a lot like her, and I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid. Well, I saw her again several nights later. It was pretty late at night, and I was staying up much later than usual. I remember that I was watching this one movie that was on TV. So when it was over and I was finally going to bed, I happened to walk past the living room window in the front side of the house. As I did, I saw someone walking on the sidewalk out front. It was a woman, and it was strange for anybody to be out this late. But when I looked closer, I saw that it was the same woman who I kept seeing. I was so confused by this that I was just standing there staring at her. She then turned and looked at me. When she saw me, even from far away, I saw a surprised look come over her face. Then she started walking off rather quickly. I actually went over to my front door and opened it up. I was so confused that I wanted to just ask her what was going on. When I opened the door, I went outside and stepped out into the yard. The woman turned and looked over her shoulder as she was walking away. I called out to her, asking what was going on. She did not stop, but instead turned back and started running. She ran out into the street, and I got to the end of my yard, but I didn't leave my property. I was not going to chase after her, but I wanted to see where she was going. The woman then ran to a car that was parked on the side of the street, across and a few houses down from mine. Then she got inside and quickly drove away. I was left as confused as ever. If she was my neighbor, why would she be driving away from here? I just went back inside and went to bed, and surprisingly, after that, I never saw the woman again. I'm still very confused about it. I'm not sure who she is or what she wanted. This happened last year and still creeps me out when I think of it. So I was at home one night by myself. I was just in my bedroom scrolling through my phone. All of a sudden, I saw this Snapchat notification from a name that I did not recognize. I was curious, so I went to Snapchat and opened the snap to see. It was a selfie of what appeared to be a man. However, this photo was taken extremely close to his face, and he also appeared to be in a very dark room. I could barely see his face at all, and didn't recognize it to be anybody that I knew. The picture honestly looked very creepy. There was no words with the picture, and that was it. I guess at some point, I must have become friends with this guy. I didn't know when though. I had Snapchat for probably 10 years. I did not send a picture back, but instead typed a message for the guy, asking who he was. Then he sent another photo. When I opened it, I saw that it was much like the one before. It was honestly so creepy, I wish I would have screenshotted it, but I didn't. I thought that maybe the person sent a picture like this by mistake, but after the second one, I realized that it was not. I asked again who it was. The person's response, though, really shocked me. He simply said, "I'm coming over now." I thought that he had to be joking, but I also realized then that I had my location on Snapchat. I quickly went into the settings and turned my location off. If this guy was serious, I was hoping that he would not know where I was. Then I blocked the mysterious guy. I thought that was it. I returned to what I was doing, but I couldn't help but feel a little bit creeped out by the whole thing. Well, roughly 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I had a terrible feeling instantly. I think by now it was like 10-something at night. Not a normal time for somebody to come to the door. I carefully left my bedroom and went down the hallway. Eventually, I got to a window that I could look out and see who was there. When I did, I saw a man wearing a ski mask standing there. I couldn't believe it. The guy must have got my location before I had turned it off. I watched him knock on the door again. Then he started to look around. When he did, I quickly moved back and away from the window. I heard the guy walk off the step, but did not know where he was going to. The next thing I knew, I heard him right outside one of the main windows. I ran back into my bedroom and then called the police. I locked my bedroom door and covered my window. Then I just waited. I did not hear anything during this time. I wasn't sure what was going on, if he was trying to break in or maybe if he left. About 10 minutes later is when the cops arrived. They came to the front door and I told them about what happened. They offered to look around, and I almost said that they didn't have to, but I ended up saying sure. Then they looked around my backyard, and surprisingly found the man hiding in some bushes. When they located him, they asked him to come out. He ignored them and then tried to run. However, the police caught up with him before he left the yard. It was the same guy who had been Snapchatting me. I'm not sure what his plans were. I'm just glad that he was caught. This happened one summer afternoon in 2018 when my partner, my stepdad, and I decided to check out an abandoned factory near my parents' house. We were just picking up my partner when we passed by it, and without thinking much about it, we started talking about exploring the place. My stepdad, who tends to act on impulse like us, pulled over right by the building and we decided to go for it. It didn't take long to find a way inside. The factory was falling apart with broken windows, walls crumbling down, and most of the roof was missing. The only real obstacle was a doorway that had some debris in front of it. We cleared that away, and as soon as we stepped through the door, something felt off. It was the middle of the summer, but the air inside the building was freezing cold. I don't mean it was a little chilly, it felt like winter. It wasn't even a damp kind of cold, like what you would expect from an abandoned building. And anyway, there was enough holes in the walls and roof that it shouldn't have been that cold. The inside was just as trashed as the outside. Piles of broken machinery, rusted metal, and old wooden beams lay scattered around. As we moved farther into the building, my partner and stepdad went ahead to check out another room, and I wandered off by myself to look through some cabinets that had been left behind. It was like everything had just been abandoned overnight. Files, worker IDs, and even older sheets from the late 90s and early 2000s were scattered everywhere. Most of the orders were packed and ready to be shipped, but none of them had ever been sent out. My stepdad pointed out how strange that was, and the factory looked like it had been closed for many decades, even though the most recent date I found was 2002. The building at most had been abandoned for 16 years. I have no expertise in something such as how quickly buildings decay, but the whole place seemed very run down for only 16 years. As we were talking about how weird the place was, I started feeling something else. It wasn't just the cold or the dust or the abandoned vibe. I was getting a feeling of danger, like something was watching us, or maybe waiting for us to leave. I can't describe it any better than that. It was like my fight or flight response kicked in, but I didn't know why. I told my partner and stepdad, and they agreed that we should head out. It was odd, and we hadn't heard anything or seen anything strange, but we all felt it. We made our way back to the car, and just as we were pulling away from the building, my partner and I both noticed something. In the doorway we had just come through, standing there, was a figure. It was hard to make out clearly. It kind of looked human, but not exactly. Something about it didn't sit right. It was like a person, but not. The figure didn't move, as it just stood there, staring at us. My stepdad didn't seem to notice since he was too busy driving. My partner and I looked at each other at the same time and asked if we had seen that thing in the door, so it was definitely not our imagination. We never went back to the factory. I can't shake the feeling whenever I drive past the building to my partner's house. I drive past the abandoned factory so often, and I wish I had never gone inside, because I think about it every time I drive by. Not too long ago, I was watching YouTube videos with my girlfriend. We were at my apartment just hanging out at night. I have an apartment that's not the greatest. It's on the first floor, and I have a little patio that goes outside from the living room through a sliding glass door. Overall, it's fine though. So like I said, my girlfriend was over and we were just sitting on the couch watching TV. We watch YouTube or whatever all the time. It was probably like 9 p.m. or so. Suddenly, the screen went black for a moment, and then we were seeing some random phone screen. We were both very confused at first, but soon realized that someone must have connected their phone to my TV by mistake. There's a lot of apartment units close by, so you can connect to other people's devices if you really want to. We were seeing the phone screen of whoever this was going through their apps. I figured they would disconnect after realizing they were connected to my TV and not their own, and I expected the screen to return to what we were doing. In the meantime though, I was kind of interested to see what this person was doing, so I didn't bother to get up and turn off the TV or anything. The person then went into the Photos app on their phone. Then they started scrolling through them one at a time. It didn't take me long to see myself among these photos. There were pictures taken straight from my social media pages, such as Facebook and Instagram, just screenshots of them. And then there were pictures of my girlfriend as well. All kinds of pictures of both of us, from both my Facebook and her Facebook as well. And the more this went on, the more confused and creeped out we were. There were probably 10 photos of each of us, and this went on for several minutes. My girlfriend and I were talking to each other in disbelief, wondering who this was and what they were doing. Then, just like that, their phone disconnected. My TV returned to its home screen, and I was left wondering what on earth had just happened. But less than 5 minutes later, as my girlfriend and I were talking to each other trying to figure out what was going on, there was suddenly a knock at my apartment door. I rarely get anybody knocking on the door, so as soon as it happened, we both stopped talking instantly. After a moment, I got up and walked over to see who was there. When I got there, I didn't see anybody. I was even more paranoid now. I figured whoever had connected to the TV had just knocked on my door. We were very confused, and eventually sat back down on the couch and tried to forget about it. We went on the YouTube app again and tried to play a video to take our mind off of things. Meanwhile, my sliding glass door in the room was mostly covered by blinds, but there was about 2 feet at the end that wasn't, as they weren't closed all the way. A few minutes into watching YouTube again, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. You couldn't really see anything outside with some light being on in the apartment and it being dark out, but I did notice that someone was really close to the window in the opening of the blinds. I looked closer, and the person came closer. Then I realized that there was a man wearing a black ski mask with his face right on the other side of the glass, looking in. My girlfriend noticed him just after me and screamed. She got up and ran out of the room, as I stood up and backed away in shock. Then, very quickly, the masked man turned and ran off into the night. I went over and closed the blinds entirely. Then I made sure that every door and window was covered and locked and all that. I was very paranoid for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. And since then, there have been no other occurrences like that. It could have just been an elaborate prank, but that was a little bit far to be taking things in my mind. And I also have no idea who would do that kind of a prank to us. My girlfriend and I still get a little bit worried that something like that might happen again when we're at my place at night. And we also have no clue who it was that could have done it. I'm just hoping that they don't return. Something weird happened to me last week. I was having a movie night by myself in my apartment. I live alone and on the second floor. My apartment building is fairly new, and I really like it. The place I live in has 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. I was on my second movie of the night, and the time was about midnight. It was Saturday, so I didn't have work or anything the next morning. My apartment happened to be on the far end of the hallway, and it was right next to the stairs that people would occasionally use. The elevator was in the center of the hallway, which is much more common for people to use. I heard the door to the stairs open and then close. It sounded like somebody was walking by down the hallway, and I didn't think anything of it, but I realized soon that it sounded like more than one person, maybe almost 10. I thought it was a little weird, but expected them all to pass by. It seemed like they all stopped right outside of my doorway though. Maybe they were going to the place across the hall from me. The apartment across the hall, though, was not lined up with my door, but was a little ways down. I just got curious for some reason, so I paused the movie and got up. I walked over to the door and looked out the peephole. What I saw shocked me. There was like 10 guys standing in the hallway right outside my apartment, and they were all facing my door. I was instantly creeped out. I didn't know who any of these guys were, and they were all wearing all black and had hoods on, so I couldn't see much of their faces. This was really bizarre, to say the least. Nobody had knocked on my door, though, and it didn't seem as though they were going to. They were just standing there. I considered for only a second opening the door and asking what was going on, but I thought better of it. I quickly walked away and decided to just ignore them. Still, I couldn't feel comfortable as long as they were all standing there. I was hoping and sort of expecting them all to move along and to keep walking away down the hallway. I listened for them to move away, but they didn't. I waited for a little longer before unpausing the movie, but I still didn't hear them walking away. The guys had to all still be there. I tried to distract myself by watching the film, but in doing so, I turned the volume down significantly. I didn't want the people outside to hear or know that I was home. As the movie played, though, I still couldn't focus. It wasn't helping to distract me from the strange men standing outside my door. Then, I heard what I was sure sounded like my doorknob turning. It was very quiet, and the only reason I had heard it was because number 1, I was already thinking about the guys at the door, and number 2, my TV volume was now very quiet. This made me feel really creeped out, even more than I already was. I also started to feel like possibly I was in danger. I stayed where I was, not sure of what to do. For the next probably 10 minutes, I didn't hear any other noises or anything. I got up to see if the men were gone, and I was really hoping that they were. When I got to the door and looked out, though, they were all still there. I ran back as quietly as possible. I sat back down on my couch and had no clue what to do in this situation. I didn't think I could call the police for this. They were just standing in my hallway. Yes, I thought they tried opening my door, but it's not like they were trying over and over or banging on the door. Looking back, I probably should have, but I was just hoping I wouldn't have to. After maybe 5 more minutes or so, I went back to look again. This time, when I looked out, they were all gone. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even heard them walking away or anything. I was so paranoid that I kept looking back out my peephole every 10 minutes or so. Luckily, I didn't see them. But before going to bed, I was so worried about it that I left my apartment and walked the hallways, just making sure that the men were gone. I went throughout the whole entire building just about without seeing them. After that, I was finally able to go to bed. By now, it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was really tired. I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, at some point, I was woken up in the night. I just remember waking up to the sounds of somebody knocking on my front door. They knocked about 2 times after I woke up. I knew it was probably the same guys, and I was terrified. I stayed in my bed and didn't even bother to get up. What could I do? Then, there was just silence. I was afraid they would break in or something. I couldn't believe that they were back, if that's in fact who was at the door. I really didn't want to get up and check, though. I laid there in my bed for the longest time. It was probably about 30 minutes or so.
I finally looked at the clock and saw that it was almost 4 a.m. Then I got up and checked the door. Nobody was outside in the hallway though. Whoever had knocked was gone. I went back to sleep after that and heard nothing more. Since then, everything's been fine.
This story happened when I was in college. I was a graduate student living on campus about an hour away from my parents' house. When the week of Thanksgiving came, I went home after classes on Monday. We had the whole rest of the week off, so I would be staying at my parents' house for a little while. When I got back home, the second day, during the night, I was sleeping in my bedroom when I was awoken. Now, my bedroom is on the first floor, and it's on the front side of the house. It was the middle of the night, and I thought that I heard the sound of a knocking on my window. It was really creepy. I sat up in bed and looked over to the window. There was a curtain covering it, so I couldn't really see anything. I did not hear the knocking again, so I got up, walked over to the window, and looked out of it. When I looked around the yard, everything seemed fine, and I didn't notice anything. I still didn't know what made the sound, though. I went back to my bed and sat down, still looking in the direction of the window. That's when I saw something move past the window only for a brief second. I couldn't see any details because I really just saw the shadow from the other side of the curtains, but somebody had definitely walked past outside. I got up again, ran over to the window, and looked out. Whoever it was gone again. I glanced all around the yard at what I could see, but I never saw anything at all. I went back to my bed again and sat back down and didn't see anything for the next few minutes. I didn't know exactly what was going on. After it seemed like things were back to normal, I tried to go back to sleep again. I laid down and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, when I was starting to fall asleep, I heard knocking again on the window. There was no mistaking it. I sat up and saw that somebody was right outside. I couldn't tell who they were because my curtains were still closed. I could just see like a silhouette of their figure. It looked to be a man. Then I heard what sounded like a faint laughter coming from the other side of the window. It was really creepy. I turned on all of the lights to my bedroom and then saw the guy finally moving away. He left my sight, and when I got to the window, he was gone again. Somebody was definitely messing with me, but I didn't know who or why. I stayed up for quite a while before finally was able to go back to sleep. The next day, I told my parents about it. We were unsure of what could be done. There were no signs of an attempted break-in. I couldn't even give a description of the man. We just hoped that it wouldn't happen again. The next day went by as normal, but that night I stayed up late watching TV in the living room with my parents. It was a little bit after midnight when we all heard a noise coming from the other room. We all got up at once and went over to a window. From there, though, we couldn't see anything. We heard the noise again. Now it was more clear that somebody was hitting my bedroom window. We called the police and then moved as far to the other side of the house as we could. We heard another noise. After that, things were quiet for a while. The police arrived really fast though. When they got there, they found a man hiding in our backyard. None of us knew who he was. The guy had been trying to break into our house through my bedroom window. The window hadn't even broke though, but there were some marks on it. I'm really glad that he didn't get in. I'm also really glad that I was not in my bedroom at the time, but with my parents in the living room. It had to be the same guy who had been there the night before. Since this happened, every year when I go back to my parents for Thanksgiving, we joke around about it. At the time, it wasn't so funny though, and I'm really glad that everyone is okay. So, me and my friends used to have this group chat that was mostly for sending stupid memes. Occasionally, we'd talk about hanging out, but it was always the same thing. People would say, yeah, for sure, and then never actually hang out. The group was me, Emily, David, and Ryan. Ryan was your typical guy, always getting into weird situations and trouble. He was constantly meeting sketchy people on eBay or Craigslist, trying to make a quick buck off random stuff he had lying around. One day, Ryan was selling his four-wheeler, and asked us to come with him because he didn't trust the buyer. We told him, if you don't trust him, why sell it to him in the first place? But Ryan didn't get what we were trying to say. He barely even acknowledged that it was a red flag. We were all confused as to why he wasn't seeing what seemed obvious to us. We told him to just leave it and wait until he could find a more trustworthy buyer, but he didn't listen. He told us the deal was on the south side of the city, which was the sketchiest area imaginable. That side of town was notorious for crime and kidnappings. That was the biggest red flag of all. None of us wanted to go, but Ryan wouldn't listen. Throughout the day, he was snapping us updates about getting his stuff ready and making progress on the sale. I messaged one of the other friends in the group chat privately and told them, I don't think we should let him go over there. They replied, why not? He's a grown man. If he gets into trouble, that's on him. We warned him. I thought that was a pretty stupid reason to abandon a friend who might get himself into serious trouble. No one else was listening to me though, and they insisted I was overreacting. They said if Ryan needed to learn a lesson, then so be it. Hours went by, and Ryan was at the person's house. We kept checking up on him because, like I said, the whole thing felt wrong. He kept snapping us back, reassuring us that everything was fine and that we were overreacting. But still, we couldn't relax until we knew he was safe. Then he sent a snap of himself in a basement. We all thought, why are you in their basement? Someone even commented, what are you doing down there? But he didn't respond, which was really odd. I figured maybe he was busy talking to the buyer and just wanted to update us. But then he snapped another picture from a different room in the basement. It was getting weirder and weirder each snap. Still, we ignored it because we figured if he was snapping us, he must be okay. The next snap was in a dark room showing someone's feet, but they weren't Ryan's feet. That's when we realized someone else had taken Ryan's phone and had been snapping us the whole time, pretending everything was fine. We started panicking. We tried to check his location, but the person who had his phone turned it off. We knew something was seriously wrong and that we needed to act fast, but we didn't know what to do. We tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. We thought about contacting his family, but none of us knew them. We were stuck. Someone suggested driving to the area to try to find his car, but we knew that could take hours and maybe even days, and it wasn't a guaranteed plan because we didn't even know the location. The next snap came in and I nearly lost it. It was a photo of fresh blood on the floor, wet, bright red, and horrifying. We all froze. That's when we realized we weren't just overreacting. Something terrible had happened. We immediately FaceTimed each other and tried calling the police from someone else's phone. But without any concrete evidence or location, we couldn't do much. We were completely out of luck. We all went to bed that night, frantic and unable to sleep. Days and weeks passed, and we didn't hear a thing from Ryan. Then, about 6 months later, we saw his face on the news. He'd been reported missing. I thought to myself, if we had just gone with him or stopped him, maybe we could have done something. After months of searching, the police gave up. Then, out of nowhere, someone found Ryan walking down the highway in nothing but his underwear and shoes. He looked starved, barely alive. When we finally got the full story in the group chat, we couldn't believe what had happened. To be honest, I can't even talk about it. It's too gruesome and traumatizing. I'm just glad that Ryan is alive.